John arrived at his local gym. A part of him couldn't believe he was here. He just wasn't a gym penis, but John had tried everything else. If he wanted to get the perfect date, he'd need to sign up. Sam? What was he doing here? Of course, Sam was married. John's theory was right. If you get muscles, you get love. Out of nowhere, Sam asked John how he was doing. Really doing. For a moment, John wanted to be honest. But he didn't come to gym to be a softie. John was here to get hard. It was John's first time in a gym since school. He tried not to read too much into that. Sam went on ahead with a chipper promise to meet up with John inside. John had two options. He could try month by month, or if he signed the 10-year Big Muscles Big Savings contract, he'd get a free easy squeezy water bottle. John wasn't a sucker. He knew the importance of hydration. The gym's clean peen pool policy meant that John would have to do something he had never done before. Get naked in front of strangers. Maybe he could set a record for speediest cleanse. Naked, John could feel the blanket of steam intimately against his private parts. John tried rinsing off in the toilet bowl. He did not get clean. John pretended he was alone and not surrounded by wrinkly, wet cocks. What was John nervous about? That he would be laughed at? There was nothing funny about a naked penis. Very fetching, John. It even matches your tan lines. Time to conquer the pool. Sam enthusiastically greeted John and offered to show him around, obviously not realizing that John was a natural athlete. John tried to strike up a conversation with the sleeping sunbather. He really wanted some attention, maybe a compliment. John deserved a compliment. John stuck close to Sam, just to make sure Sam knew John could swim. Not because John was worried about drowning. No, not that. The diving board. At school, all the peenlets had to jump off it, but John had been too scared. Well, John wasn't a scared peanut anymore. Well done, John. The judges give you 3 for form, but 9 for enthusiasm. This wasn't hard. John couldn't believe peens actually got gold medals just for splashing around. Maybe he could become an Olympian. He was slowing down a bit, flailing a bit. But John pushed on, knowing that looking good in a Speedo was the only thing that could save him from an empty existence. John wanted to take a break, forever. The pool was not his friend. It was not the blissful wet dream of his fantasies. It was a hellish prison of murderous fluid determined to drown him. No wonder life crawled out of the sea, desperate to escape the water. Done. John had not drowned, but more importantly, he had not quit. Time to hit the weight room. John's muscles bunched and bulged. The time in the gym was already paying off. Fresh from conquering the pool, John felt ready for anything the gym could throw at him, even heavy metal weights. Clearly, John knew how to handle equipment. John smashed the mirror. He didn't want to look at his old body. He wanted to be hard. Sam cheered John on, as if he needed it. Adrenaline coursed through John's veins, his butthole clenched like a fist. John was forging himself into the peen he saw on movie screens, bulging and sweat-slicked, hard and shiny. Boom! John was cocked and loaded. Didn't Sam ever get out of breath? The stream of encouragement was exhausting. Slow and steady. That's right, John. Like a lover. Or pouring gravy. John, getting flung from fast-moving objects since preschool. That had gotten John's heart rate up and his life expectancy down. John was sweating like a senator on a sex tape, but he wasn't done. John took a deep breath, clenched, and pulled. Sam made this look so easy. John squashed the thought. He'd just have to push harder. John tried to make eye contact with Sam, get in his head a bit. Sam didn't seem to notice John, but John could tell Sam was impressed. Even though he still hadn't looked at John, not that it mattered to John, because John was in the zone, deep in the zone. With the sound of a deflating truck tire, John's sphincter gave out. Sam congratulated John for trying and told him it was okay to take things slow, as if John was going to quit. Well, he wasn't. John had a mission, and the reunion was getting closer. soon as John woke up, the mirror called to him. His abs looked like a pack of vacuum-sealed hot dogs. Tasty. Jim had remade John into a sculpted adongus. He was finally everything a peen should be: successful, traveled, and photogenic. It was time for his morning pre-gym workout. The reunion invitation caught John's eye. He read it again, and again. Stunned. He'd gotten the date wrong. Very wrong. The reunion was tonight. Tonight! He'd have to go alone. They'd all be there, and they'd look at John and they'd know he was still a loser. No. There was still time. John needed a date fast. He'd have to go out. He'd have to make an impact. John had to dress his best, only better. Oh my, John. Welcome to the gun show. Is this sending the right message? There had to be someone single and desperately alone in the city. Someone besides John. He just had to find them. John went straight to the nearest bar. Sure, it was still early, but he couldn't waste any time. There must be some day drinkers he could pick up. It was a classy place. Even the vomit was high quality. The bouncer looked like a hagfish that had taken up lacrosse. John stepped into the bar and saw her. The answer to the question, what was John's purpose? Her. Loving her. Being with her. Taking her to the reunion. Their eyes met and John knew she felt the same. Gladys did not feel the same. But John wasn't going to give up on their life together. A couple of drinks would loosen her up to their destiny. Wow, Gladys was not an amateur when it came to drinking. John had to keep up. It was working. Gladys was definitely warming up to John. John's bladder was very full. It sloshed audibly as he moved. Holy balls! John had never felt such relief. John looked around. Gladys was gone. John cursed his petite bladder. The bored bartender shrugged and told John Gladys had left because some creep was trying to get her drunk. The bar was empty. The creep must have left too. It was clear the cockpit was on autopilot. Time for John to hit the next bar. John's anxiety had sunk under the surface of the beer he'd drunk, while his confidence was floating high. This was the place he'd find love. It was empty, except for the bartender. Clearly this bar's only special was unhappy hour. Two for one was a good deal though, and so far the beer had lifted John's spirits. Another 4 would make him feel twice as good. The bartender gave John a smile that set his heart hammering. He had to impress her. What was so offensive about offering a big tip in exchange for a date? John had thought bartenders loved tips. He needed to find a better club. One with a vibe. John was drawn by the pulse of the music. It pulled him forward like a moth to a fiery death. John was running out of time to find a date and prove that he wasn't a loser. Dancing, the real way to flirt. The way of animals, of wild sexual creatures. John strutted and shook his booty. With booze buzzing round his head, John found himself on the dance floor. Everyone was up close and sweaty. John was exhilarated. He felt alive. John was working himself up to try a little bump and grind. It was a moment out of a movie. John alone on the dance floor with a gorgeous penis, their sexual chemistry exploding. She moved away, coyly, John could tell when someone was playing hard to get. He let her marinate in the tension before making his move. John wasn't taking no for an answer. Some people have no sense of fun, but John was certain the next bar would be different. The next bar wasn't different. John couldn't understand why everyone was so sensitive. It was like no one wanted to have a good time. Like no one had a sense of humor. John had meant that as a compliment. When did the world get so uptight? John's ego was as bruised as his shaft. He had to admit it. He'd failed. He was where he belonged, in a creepy murder alley covered in trash. John would have to go through the garbage to get out. Oh, that's gross. Oh, it's so moist, but textured. It smells like rotting dick yogurt. John's misery was sour in his mouth. He needed a drink to wash it down. There was still one bar he hadn't been kicked out of yet. John had cleaned himself up as much as possible. He really needed a mint. John nailed it. John let out his anger, his frustration. Life was a shitty joke. It wasn't fair. You want to mess with John? Do you? The next bar wasn't different. John couldn't understand why everyone was so sensitive. It was like no one wanted to have a good time. Like no one had a sense of humor. John had meant that as a compliment. When did the world get so uptight? John's ego was as bruised as his shaft. He had to admit it. He'd failed. He was where he belonged, in a creepy murder alley covered in trash. Oh, that's gross. It smells like rotting dick yogurt. John's misery was sour in his mouth. He needed a drink to wash it down. There was still one bar he hadn't been kicked out of yet. John had cleaned himself up as much as possible. He really needed a mint. John got it in, but he needed more to satisfy the machine. Nailed it. John let out his anger, his frustration. Life was a shitty joke. It wasn't fair. You want to mess with John? Do you? The next bar wasn't different. John couldn't understand why everyone was so sensitive. It was like no one wanted to have a good time. Like no one had a sense of humor. John had meant that as a compliment. When did the world get so uptight? John's ego was as bruised as his shaft. He had to admit it. He'd failed. He was where he belonged, in a creepy murder alley covered in trash. John would have to go through the garbage to get out. Oh, that's gross. Oh, it's so moist, but textured. It smells like rotting dick yogurt. John's misery was sour in his mouth. He needed a drink to wash it down. There was still one bar he hadn't been kicked out of yet. John had cleaned himself up as much as possible. He really needed a mint. John got it in, but he needed more to satisfy the machine. Nailed it. John let out his anger, his frustration. Life was a shitty joke. It wasn't fair. You want to mess with John? Do you?
This is what you get. Fuck you, you fucking thing. You had one job. Die, 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 die! It's not fair. It's not. It's not. It's not. It's not. That's how you get what you want.
Ugh, menthol.
John wanted the strongest drink they had. Rough night? Someone asked John. He hadn't noticed her when he came in, but now he did. It really had been a rough night for John, but he felt a little better that someone cared enough to ask. But destiny had given John a second chance. John made his move. Unfortunately, according to Alice and to her boyfriend Chadrick, it was the wrong move. Chadrick threw John into the alley and followed, making unoriginal but still terrifying threats. Get him, John! I can't watch. Oh my God! Ouch! Don't hold back! Give it to him! Brutal. John had survived. No, he'd won. He'd won. He'd won. He wasn't a loser. And there was the proof lying in a bruised, bloody heap. John didn't need a date to the reunion. He needed to go over there and beat the pre-cum out of those dicks. High school reunion, the perfect time to teach someone a lesson. The doors of the school, a sight John had dreaded every day for years, and now he was going willingly through them, unafraid, fueled by years of unprocessed anger fermented in loneliness. John was back! The chickens were coming home to roost, and they were all cocks. These were the peanlets he'd grown up with, now with jobs and marriages and beer bellies. John was surprised at how ordinary they had all turned out. He spotted them, John's tormentors. Time for them to feel the wrath. Whoa! Dodge! Ha! Who's a loser now? Who? That's the stuff, John. Pow! Fight back, John! Don't let up. How do you like that?
Shake off the pain, buddy. Careful. Ow!
Ha! John had won. He'd won. No one could say John was a loser now. John's primal joy faded as he saw how the other penises looked at him. Not like a winner, like he was trash. John tumbled down the steps, hitting every bruise on his length and his ego. It was her, Harmony. She had been at the reunion. She'd seen it all and followed John out. To laugh at him more? No, to see if he was all right. Why did that hurt John so much? This was John's chance to ask her why all those years ago she'd said to him, "No one will ever love you." Harmony stared at John in shock. How could John not know why? Didn't John remember what he'd done? There was nothing Sam enjoyed more than the fresh air of an early morning. The dew sparkling on the grass, the music of the trees, space to think.
What was that smell? It made Sam's eye water. It was John, passed out and crusted with vomit and regret. John was awake and tolerably clean. Sam tried to be gentle and invited John to join him on his walk.